in the windswept mountains of the western Balkans, where the Adriatic Sea meets the rugged limestone peaks that would later bear witness to countless civilizations. Archaeologists in the early 20th century began uncovering traces of a people whose very name had become synonymous with mystery and ancient power. The systematic excavation of hilltop settlements across modern-day Albania, Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and coastal Croatia revealed sophisticated fortifications, intricate metalwork, and burial practices that spoke of a warrior culture that had dominated the southeastern European landscape for over a millennium. These archaeological discoveries, initiated by Austrian and German expeditions in the 1900s and continued by Yugoslav and international teams throughout the latter half of the century, gradually pieced together the material culture of the Illyrians, a confederation of Indo-European tribes whose influence extended from the shores of the Adriatic to the valleys of the Drava and Sava rivers, and whose interactions with Greeks, Romans, and Celts would shape the political and cultural development of the entire region. The stratigraphy of sites like Daorson and Bosnia and Herzegovina, with its massive cyclopean walls and evidence of continuous occupation from the 4th century BCE through the Roman conquest, provides tangible evidence of Illyrian urban planning and defensive architecture that rivals contemporary Greek and Roman construction techniques. Archaeological assemblages from these excavations reveal a complex society, engaged in extensive trade networks, metalworking traditions that produce some of the finest bronze and iron artifacts of the ancient world, and burial customs that reflected both indigenous traditions and foreign influences absorbed through centuries of contact with Mediterranean civilizations. The typological analysis of Illyrian pottery, weapons, and jewelry demonstrates not only sophisticated craftsmanship, but also the evolution of distinctive cultural markers that distinguish Illyrian material culture from their Thracian, Celtic, and Greek neighbors, while simultaneously revealing the extent to which these peoples participated in broader European and Mediterranean exchange systems. Carbon dating of organic materials from Illyrian sites consistently places the emergence of recognizable Illyrian culture in the late Bronze Age, around 1200 to 1000 BCE, with the full flowering of their civilization occurring during the Iron Age, particularly from the 8th through the 1st centuries BCE. The archaeological record suggests that the Illyrians developed from indigenous Balkan populations who had inhabited the region since the Neolithic period, gradually adopting Indo-European languages and cultural practices through processes of migration, cultural diffusion, and ethnogenesis that remain subjects of ongoing scholarly debate. Excavations at sites like Shkodër in northern Albania and Epidamnus on the Albanian coast have revealed evidence of proto-urban settlements dating to the 9th and 8th centuries BCE, characterized by sophisticated metallurgy, organized craft, production, and evidence of social stratification that would become hallmarks of classical Illyrian society. The material evidence from these early phases of Illyrian development includes distinctive pottery styles featuring geometric patterns and stylized animal motifs, bronze fibulae and belt buckles that demonstrate advanced metalworking techniques, and weapons assemblages that reflect both local production and importation of high-status items from Greek and Italic workshops. These archaeological indicators suggest that by the 8th century BCE, Illyrian communities had developed complex social hierarchies, specialized craft production, and extensive trade relationships that connected them to broader European and Mediterranean networks of exchange and cultural transmission. The stratigraphic evidence from major Illyrian settlements reveals continuous cultural development and adaptation, with each successive layer demonstrating increasing sophistication in urban planning, fortification design, and material culture production, while maintaining distinctive Illyrian characteristics that persisted even as these communities engaged with and adapted influences from neighboring civilizations. Isotope analysis of human remains from Illyrian cemeteries has provided insights into diet, migration patterns, and social organization, revealing that Illyrian communities maintain strong local identities while participating in regional networks of trade, intermarriage, and cultural exchange that contributed to the development of their distinctive civilization. The archaeological documentation of Illyrian sites extends beyond material culture to include evidence of religious practices, artistic traditions, and technological innovations that demonstrate the complexity and sophistication of these ancient Balkan peoples, whose legacy would profoundly influence the subsequent development of southeastern European civilization, and whose material remains continue to yield new insights into the nature of Iron Age European society and culture. The emergence of recognizable Illyrian culture from the broader matrix of Bronze Age Balkan populations represents a complex process of ethnogenesis that unfolded over several centuries, driven by factors including population movements, technological innovations, environmental changes, and cultural interactions that created the distinctive civilization known to classical authors and revealed through modern archaeological investigation. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Proto-Illyrian populations of the Late Bronze Age inhabited a region characterized by dramatic geographic diversity, from the coastal plains and islands of the eastern Adriatic to the mountainous interior valleys and highland plateaus that provided natural defensive positions and controlled key routes of communication and trade between the Mediterranean world and the continental European interior. The material culture of these early communities, as revealed through excavations at sites like Gradina on Bosset and Vojvodina, and the Hilfort settlements of the Glaznac Plateau in Bosnia, demonstrates gradual transitions in pottery styles, metallurgical techniques, and settlement patterns that mark the emergence of distinctively Illyrian cultural traditions. From earlier Bronze Age substrates, radiocarbon dating and stratigraphic analysis from key sites indicate that the period between 1200 and 800 BCE witnessed significant transformations in settlement organization, with the development of fortified hilltop communities, specialized craft production areas, and evidence of social differentiation that would characterize later Illyrian society. The pottery assemblages from this transitional period reveal the development of distinctive Illyrian ceramic traditions, including the characteristic burnished black pottery, with incised geometric decorations, storage vessels with applied cordons, and finger impressions, and fine tableware that demonstrates both local innovation and selective adoption of decorative motifs from neighboring cultures. Metallurgical analysis of bronze and early iron artifacts from Proto-Illyrian sites reveal sophisticated alloying techniques, complex manufacturing processes, and the development of distinctive weapon and jewelry types that would become hallmarks of Illyrian material culture throughout the Iron Age and into the period of Roman contact. The settlement patterns evident in the archaeological record of this formative period show a preference for naturally defensive positions on hilltops and promontories, often enhanced by the construction of stone ramparts and wooden palisades that provided protection for communities engaged in agriculture, animal husbandry, and craft production in the fertile valleys and coastal plains below. Evidence from pollen analysis and environmental archaeology suggests that Proto-Illyrian communities practice mixed farming economies that combine cereal cultivation with livestock raising, supplemented by hunting, fishing, and the exploitation of forest resources that provided materials for construction, tool manufacture, and trade with neighboring regions. The burial practices documented from cemeteries associated with Proto-Illyrian settlements reveal increasing social stratification, with elite graves containing imported luxury goods, sophisticated metalwork, and evidence of ritual practices that reflect both indigenous traditions and influences from Greek, Italic, and Central European cultures. Anthropological analysis of skeletal remains from these early Illyrian sites provides evidence of population continuity with earlier Bronze Age inhabitants, while also documenting the integration of new populations and cultural influences that contributed to the emergence of the historical Illyrian peoples described in Greek and Roman sources. The linguistic evidence, though fragmentary, suggests that the Proto-Illyrian population spoke dialects belonging to the Indo-European language family, with particular connections to other Paleo-Balkan languages such as Thracian and Dacian, while also showing influences from pre-Indo-European substrates that may reflect the linguistic heritage of earlier Neolithic and Bronze Age populations. Archaeological evidence for religious and ritual practices during this formative period includes votive deposits in caves and springs, evidence of ancestor veneration in burial contexts, and the construction of cult sites on prominent landscape, features that suggest the development of religious traditions that would persist throughout Illyrian history and influence later Roman provincial practices in the region. The development of distinctive Illyrian settlement patterns and material culture during the early Iron Age reflects sophisticated adaptation to the diverse environmental conditions of the Western Balkans, with archaeological evidence revealing complex urban planning, advanced metallurgical techniques, and extensive trade networks that connected Illyrian communities to broader European and Mediterranean exchange systems. Excavations at major Illyrian centers such as Daorson in the Neretva Valley, Skadar near modern Shkodër, and the coastal settlements of Ryazan and Lissos have revealed sophisticated urban planning that maximize defensive advantages while facilitating commercial and administrative activities essential to the functioning of complex tribal confederations. The fortification systems documented at these sites demonstrate remarkable engineering skill, with massive stone walls constructed using polygonal masonry techniques that created virtually impregnable defensive perimeters around settlements that could house populations numbering in the thousands during periods of conflict or seasonal gathering. Archaeological analysis of the construction techniques employed in these fortifications reveals knowledge of advanced architectural principles, including the use of angled bastions to provide overlapping fields of fire, complex gate systems with multiple defensive chambers, and drainage systems that prevented water damage to foundation structures, built on limestone terrain prone to seasonal flooding. The internal organization of major Illyrian settlements, as revealed through systematic excavation and geophysical survey, shows careful planning that separated residential, commercial, craft production, and religious areas while maintaining efficient communication routes and ensuring access to essential resources including water sources, storage facilities, and defensive positions. Stratigraphic evidence from residential areas within these settlements reveals multi-room stone houses with evidence of sophisticated domestic arrangements, including specialized areas for food preparation and storage, craft production activities, and social gatherings that reflect complex family and community organization patterns. The material culture assemblages from these domestic contexts include fine pottery vessels for storage, preparation, and consumption of food and beverages, bronze and iron tools for agricultural and craft activities, personal ornaments that demonstrate individual and group identity markers, and evidence of textile production including loom weights, spindle whorls, and bone needles that indicate sophisticated weaving traditions. Archaeological evidence for craft specialization within Illyrian settlements includes dedicated workshops for metalworking, pottery production, bone and antler working, and the manufacture of luxury goods including jewelry, weapons, and ceremonial objects that were traded throughout the region and exchanged with farm merchants and political allies. The metallurgical workshops documented at sites like Daorson and Ryazan reveal advanced techniques for bronze casting, iron forging, and the production of composite objects that combine different metals and materials to create functional and decorative items of exceptional quality and durability. Archaeometric analysis of metals from these workshops demonstrates knowledge of complex alloying techniques, sophisticated furnace designs that achieve high temperatures necessary for iron working, and trade relationships that brought raw materials from distant sources including tin from Central European mines and amber from Baltic coastal regions. The pottery production centers identified at major Illyrian sites reveal standardized manufacturing techniques, sophisticated firing technologies that produce consistently high-quality ceramics, and decorative traditions that combine local motifs with influences from Greek, Italic, and Central European artistic traditions. Storage facilities within Illyrian settlements, including large ceramic pithoi, stone-lined storage chambers, and evidence of granary structures, demonstrate sophisticated food preservation and distribution systems that supported dense populations and enabled communities to survive seasonal variations in agricultural productivity and periodic disruptions caused by warfare or environmental stress. The water management systems documented at Illyrian sites include sophisticated cisterns for rainwater collection, channels for directing seasonal runoff away from residential areas, and evidence of communal water sources that served both practical and ritual purposes within the community organization. Religious and ceremonial areas within major Illyrian settlements reveal evidence of both indigenous cult practices and influences from Greek and Roman religious traditions, with archaeological evidence including votive deposits, ritual vessels, and architectural features that suggest complex religious hierarchies and ceremonial practices that reinforce social cohesion and political authority within tribal confederations. The social organization and political structures of Illyrian society, as reconstructed from archaeological evidence, literary sources, and comparative analysis with contemporary European Iron Age cultures, reveal complex hierarchical systems that balance tribal autonomy with confederate cooperation, enabling these communities to maintain their independence and cultural distinctiveness while engaging effectively with more centralized Greek and Roman political systems. Archaeological evidence from elite burial contexts, settlement hierarchies, and the distribution of luxury goods demonstrates the existence of complex social stratification within Illyrian communities, with clear distinctions between warrior, elites, craft specialists, merchants, farmers, and dependent populations that reflected both inherited status and achieved positions based on military prowess, wealth accumulation, and political leadership. The elite warrior burials documented at sites throughout the Illyrian cultural area reveal sophisticated concepts of social rank and political authority, with grave goods including imported luxury items, locally produced high-status objects, weapons assemblages that demonstrate individual military achievements, and evidence of ritual practices that reinforced elite status and justified political authority within tribal structures. Analysis of these burial assemblages reveals gender-based distinctions in status markers, with male elite graves typically containing weapons, drinking vessels, and symbols of political authority, while female elite burials include elaborate jewelry, textile working tools, and household luxury items that suggest important roles in maintaining family honor, managing domestic economies, and preserving cultural traditions. The distribution of elite burial sites across the Illyrian landscape suggests a political system based on territorial control by local aristocratic families, who maintained authority over specific regions while participating in broader confederate structures that enabled collective action for defense, trade regulation, and the management of external relations with neighboring peoples and states. Settlement hierarchy analysis reveals a complex system of political organization that included major fortified centers serving as regional capitals, secondary settlements that controlled key routes and resources, and smaller communities that provided agricultural surplus and military recruits for the maintenance of Confederate military forces and the support of elite households. The archaeological evidence for craft specialization and trade organization within Illyrian society suggests the existence of merchant classes who managed long-distance exchange relationships, maintained commercial networks that extended throughout the Mediterranean and Central European regions, and provided essential goods and services that supported the complex material culture documented at major Illyrian sites. Literary sources from Greek and Roman authors describe Illyrian political institutions including assemblies of warriors who participated in decision-making processes. Elected were leaders who commanded military expeditions and diplomatic missions, and hereditary aristocrats who maintained authority over specific territories and populations. While acknowledging obligations to broader confederate structures, the evidence for Illyrian military organization reveals sophisticated systems of recruitment, training, and command that enabled these relatively small tribal populations to maintain military effectiveness against much larger Greek and Roman forces, with archaeological evidence including standardized weapons production, fortification construction projects that required coordinated labor forces, and evidence of military camps and temporary settlements that suggest organized campaign activities. Economic organization within Illyrian society, as revealed through analysis of production sites, trade goods distributions, and settlement patterns, demonstrates complex systems of resource management that included agricultural surplus production, specialized craft manufacture for both local consumption and export, and commercial relationships that brought foreign luxury goods and raw materials to Illyrian communities in exchange for local products and services. The evidence for religious and ritual organization within Illyrian society includes cult sites that served multiple communities, evidence of priesthood or ritual specialist roles, and ceremonial practices that reinforce social hierarchies and political relationships while maintaining connections to ancestral traditions, and landscape-based spiritual practices that provided cultural continuity and community identity. Legal and judicial practices. Practices within Illyrian society, though poorly documented in direct sources, can be inferred from comparative evidence and archaeological indicators that suggest customary law systems based on kinship obligations, compensation payments for injuries and damages, and ritual practices for resolving disputes and maintaining social order within and between tribal communities. The integration of women into Illyrian political and economic systems, as suggested by archaeological evidence from burial contexts, settlement patterns, and material culture distributions, reveals important roles in maintaining household economies, managing craft production activities, and participating in ritual practices that reinforce community solidarity and cultural transmission across generations. The economic foundations of Illyrian society rested upon sophisticated systems of agricultural production, craft specialization, and long-distance trade that enabled these communities to maintain complex social hierarchies, support dense populations, and engage effectively in the competitive political environment of Iron Age southeastern Europe. Archaeological evidence from settlement excavations, environmental analysis, and the distribution of trade goods reveals agricultural practices that combine Mediterranean and continental European techniques to maximize productivity from diverse ecological zones ranging from coastal plains and river valleys to upland plateaus and mountainous terrain. Palynological analysis from lake sediments and archaeological contexts throughout the Illyrian cultural area demonstrates cultivation of cereal crops including wheat, barley, and millet, along with evidence of olive cultivation in coastal regions, viticulture on suitable slopes and terraces, and the exploitation of diverse wild plant resources that supplemented agricultural production and provided materials for craft activities and trade exchange. The animal husbandry practices of Illyrian communities, as revealed through archaeological analysis of bone assemblages from settlement and ritual contexts, emphasize cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs adapted to local environmental conditions, while also including horses valued for transportation, warfare, and status display, and evidence of hunting activities that provided meat, hides, antler, and other animal products essential for both subsistence and craft production. Archaeological evidence for agricultural intensification during the Iron Age includes terracing systems that maximized arable land on steep slopes, irrigation channels that directed seasonal water flow to cultivated areas, and storage facilities that enabled communities to accumulate surplus production for trade, seasonal variation management, and support of non-agricultural specialists including craftspeople, warriors, and religious practitioners. The craft production systems documented at major Illyrian sites reveal sophisticated specialization that included metalworking traditions capable of producing high-quality bronze and iron objects for both local use and export, pottery manufacture that combined functional and artistic considerations, textile production that created both everyday clothing and luxury fabrics for elite consumption, and specialized manufacturing of weapons, jewelry, and ceremonial objects that served both practical and symbolic functions within Illyrian society. Archaeometric analysis of Illyrian metalwork demonstrates advanced knowledge of metallurgical techniques including complex alloying, sophisticated casting methods, and finishing techniques that produced objects of exceptional quality and durability, while also revealing trade relationships that brought raw materials from distant sources, including copper from Alpine regions, tin from Bohemian and British sources, and iron ore from local and regional mining operations. The pottery production traditions of Illyrian communities reveal both functional efficiency and artistic sophistication, with archaeological evidence including specialized pottery workshops, evidence of potter's wheels and advanced firing techniques, and stylistic traditions that combine local decorative motifs with influences from Greek, Italic, and Central European artistic traditions while maintaining distinctive Illyrian characteristics. Archaeological evidence for long-distance trade relationships includes Greek pottery and wine amphory at Illyrian sites, Illyrian metalwork and amber beads found in Greek and Italic contexts, and evidence of commercial relationships that connected Illyrian communities to exchange networks extending throughout the Mediterranean basin and into continental European regions. The trade routes that connected Illyrian territories to broader exchange systems included overland paths that crossed mountain passes to reach Pannonian and Central European markets, river routes that utilized the major drainage systems of the Western Balkans, and coastal navigation that connected Illyrian ports to Greek colonies and Italic trading centers throughout the Adriatic and broader Mediterranean regions. Archaeological evidence for commercial organization within Illyrian society includes standardized weights and measures, evidence of market areas within major settlements, storage facilities designed for bulk goods handling and craft production, areas oriented toward export markets rather than purely local consumption. The economic relationships between Illyrian communities and their Greek and Roman neighbors involved complex exchange systems that included formal trade agreements, tribute payments, military service contracts, and diplomatic gift exchange that enabled Illyrian elites to access luxury goods and foreign technologies, while maintaining political autonomy and cultural distinctiveness. Numismatic evidence from the later periods of Illyrian history reveals the adoption of coinage systems based on Greek and Roman models, while maintaining distinctive local iconography and weight standards that reflect continued cultural independence and the sophisticated economic organization necessary for the production and circulation of standardized monetary systems. The evidence for resource exploitation within Illyrian territories includes mining operations that extracted metals, stone, and other raw materials, forest management practices that provided timber for construction and fuel for metallurgical operations, and evidence of specialized hunting and fishing activities that provided both subsistence resources and trade goods including furs, hides, and preserved fish products. The religious beliefs and practices of the Illyrians, reconstructed from archaeological evidence, fragmentary inscriptions, and comparative analysis with related Paleo-Balkan and broader Indo-European traditions, reveal complex spiritual systems that integrated indigenous landscape-based cults with influences from Greek and Roman religious practices, while maintaining distinctive characteristics that reflected the unique cultural identity and environmental conditions of the Western Balkans. Archaeological evidence for Illyrian religious practices includes votive deposits in caves, springs, and other natural features that were considered sacred, with offerings including metalwork, pottery, animal remains, and personal ornaments that suggest beliefs in supernatural forces associated with specific landscape features, and the need to maintain proper relationships with these powers through ritual offerings and ceremonial activities. The cult sites documented throughout Illyrian territories reveal sophisticated religious architecture that included stone-built sanctuaries, evidence of ritual feasting and sacrifice, and votive inscriptions that provide glimpses of Illyrian religious vocabulary and concepts, though the fragmentary nature of these sources continues to challenge scholarly attempts to reconstruct comprehensive understanding of Illyrian theological systems and ritual practices. Burial practices documented in Illyrian cemeteries reveal complex beliefs about death, afterlife, and the relationship between the living and deceased that influence social organization, political authority, and cultural continuity across generations, with grave goods selections, burial orientations, and cemetery organization patterns that reflect both individual status and broader community religious concepts. The evidence for ancestor veneration within Illyrian religious systems includes elaborate tomb constructions, recurring ritual activities at burial sites, and the integration of burial areas into settlement landscapes in ways that maintained ongoing connections between living communities and deceased family or tribal members, who continue to influence daily life through spiritual presence and ritual obligations. Archaeological analysis of Illyrian religious art and iconography, preserved in metalwork, stone carving, and pottery decoration, reveals symbolic systems that included animal motifs with probable totemic significance, geometric patterns that may represent cosmological concepts, and anthropomorphic figures that could represent deities, ancestors, or ritual practitioners within complex spiritual hierarchies. The influence of Greek religious practices on Illyrian spiritual systems is documented through archaeological evidence including imported Greek religious artifacts, the adoption of Greek deities and cult practices at some Illyrian sites, and inscriptional evidence that suggests syncretism between indigenous Illyrian religious concepts and Greek theological systems, particularly in coastal regions with intensive Greek colonial contact. Roman influence on Illyrian religious practices, particularly evident in the later periods of independent Illyrian history and continuing into the provincial period, includes the adoption of Roman deities and ritual practices, the construction of Roman-style religious architecture, and evidence of religious syncretism that created hybrid spiritual systems combining Illyrian, Greek, and Roman elements. The evidence for priestly or religious specialist roles within Illyrian society includes burial contexts that suggest individuals with particular religious authority, specialized religious artifacts that may have been used by ritual practitioners, and the organization of cult sites in ways that suggest institutionalized religious hierarchies and specialized religious knowledge systems. Seasonal and agricultural ritual practices within Illyrian religious systems, as inferred from archaeological evidence and comparative analysis with related cultures, likely included ceremonies associated with planting and harvest cycles, pastoral activities including seasonal transhumance, and community festivals that reinforce social bonds while fulfilling religious obligations to supernatural powers responsible for agricultural success and community welfare. The integration of military activities with religious practices within Illyrian culture is suggested by archaeological evidence, including weapons deposits in ritual contexts, evidence of pre-battle and post-victory ceremonial activities, and the association of warfare with religious concepts that may have included divine protection, ritual purification, and the spiritual significance of martial prowess and victory. Sacred kingship concepts within Illyrian political and religious systems may have integrated temporal and spiritual authority in ways that legitimize political power. through religious sanction, with archaeological evidence including elite burial practices that suggest divine associations, ceremonial objects that may have served religious and political functions, and settlement organization that integrated political and religious spaces. The evidence for healing and medical practices within Illyrian religious systems includes votive offerings that suggest appeals to supernatural powers for health and healing, evidence of ritual purification practices, and the possible integration of medical knowledge with spiritual practices that address both physical and supernatural causes of illness and misfortune. Divination and prophetic practices within Illyrian religious systems, though poorly documented in direct sources, may have included methods for determining divine will, predicting future events, and guiding important decisions through consultation with spiritual authorities, natural omens, or specialized ritual procedures that access supernatural knowledge, essential for community guidance and individual decision-making. The military organization and warfare practices of the Illyrians represented sophisticated adaptations to the mountainous terrain and political conditions of the Western Balkans, enabling these tribal confederations to maintain independence against Greek and Roman expansion, while developing military traditions that would influence subsequent European warfare development and provide models for guerrilla and irregular warfare that proved remarkably effective against conventional ancient military systems. Archaeological evidence for Illyrian military organization includes standardized weapon production at major settlements, evidence of specialized warrior training facilities, and fortification systems that demonstrate coordinated military engineering. Projects requiring significant labor organization and strategic planning capabilities that suggest sophisticated command structures and military leadership hierarchies. The weapons assemblages documented from Illyrian archaeological contexts reveal distinctive military traditions that emphasize mobility, individual combat effectiveness, and adaptation to local terrain conditions, with typical warrior equipment, including iron swords and daggers designed for close combat, spears suitable for both throwing and thrusting, bronze or iron helmets that provide a protection while maintaining visibility and hearing, and shields constructed with organic materials that have rarely survived in archaeological contexts but are described in literary sources and depicted in artistic representations. Archaeological analysis of Illyrian metalwork demonstrates advanced weaponsmithing techniques that produced high-quality iron and bronze weapons capable of competing with contemporary Greek and Roman military equipment while maintaining distinctive design characteristics that reflected local preferences, fighting techniques, and cultural identity markers that distinguish Illyrian warriors from their neighbors and enemies. The evidence for Illyrian military architecture includes sophisticated fortification systems that maximize defensive advantages provided by natural terrain, while incorporating advanced engineering techniques including polygonal masonry, overlapping defensive positions, complex gate systems, and integrated water supplies that enabled communities to withstand extended sieges and coordinate defensive operations across multiple settlements. Illyrian military tactics, as described in Greek and Roman sources and inferred from archaeological evidence of battlefield sites and fortification design, emphasize mobility, knowledge of local terrain, surprise attacks, and the integration of infantry and cavalry forces in ways that prove particularly effective against the more rigid formations preferred by Mediterranean military systems. The naval capabilities of coastal Illyrian communities, documented through archaeological evidence of harbor installations, ship construction materials, and literary references to Illyrian piracy and naval warfare, reveal sophisticated maritime military traditions that enabled these communities to project power throughout the Adriatic region and challenge both Greek and Roman naval supremacy through fast, maneuverable vessels and knowledge of local coastal conditions. Archaeological evidence for military recruitment and organization within Illyrian society suggests systems based on kinship obligations, territorial defense requirements, involuntary association of warriors seeking glory, wealth, and social advancement through military service, with leadership roles assigned based on combat experience, strategic knowledge, and the ability to maintain warrior loyalty through successful campaigns and equitable distribution of spoils. The integration of warfare with Illyrian economic systems is revealed through archaeological evidence of military camps that served as bases for raiding expeditions, the distribution of captured goods throughout Illyrian territories, and the use of military service as a mechanism for accessing foreign luxury goods and technologies that could not be obtained through peaceful trade relationships. Illyrian military alliances and confederate warfare practices, documented in literary sources and inferred from archaeological evidence, of coordinated fortification construction and standardized military equipment, demonstrate sophisticated diplomatic and strategic coordination that enabled relatively small tribal populations to compete effectively with much larger Greek and Roman military forces. Through coordinated resistance and mutual support agreements, the evidence for Illyrian mercenary service in foreign armies, particularly Greek and later Roman military forces, reveals the reputation of Illyrian warriors and the extent to which their military skills were valued by foreign employers, while also providing mechanisms for cultural exchange and the acquisition of foreign military techniques and equipment that enhanced Illyrian military capabilities. Archaeological evidence for the ritual aspects of Illyrian warfare includes weapon deposits in religious contexts, evidence of pre-battle and post-victory ceremonial activities, and burial practices that honored fallen warriors while providing spiritual protection for military activities and ensuring divine support for military success. The impact of Illyrian military organization on their political and social development is evident in the prominence of warrior elites in archaeological and literary sources, the integration of military leadership with political authority, and the role of military success in legitimizing social hierarchy and resource distribution within tribal confederations. The legacy of Illyrian military traditions can be traced through subsequent European warfare development, particularly in the emphasis on mobility, terrain exploitation, and irregular warfare techniques that would influence military thinking throughout the medieval and early modern periods and provide models for resistance movements that challenged centralized state authority through decentralized, locally adapted military organization. The complex relationships between Illyrian communities and their Greek neighbors represented one of the most significant cultural and political dynamics of the ancient Western Balkans, involving patterns of conflict, cooperation, cultural exchange, and mutual influence that shaped the development of both civilizations and created hybrid cultural zones that preserved elements of both Greek and Illyrian traditions while generating new synthetic forms of material culture, political organization, and social practice. Archaeological evidence from Greek colonial sites along the eastern Adriatic coast reveals extensive interaction with indigenous Illyrian populations. From the earliest phases of Greek settlement, with material culture assemblages that include both imported Greek goods and locally produced items showing Greek influence, demonstrating that cultural exchange began immediately upon Greek arrival and continued throughout the period of coexistence between these two civilizations. The establishment of major Greek colonies such as Epidamnus, Apollonia, Corcyra, and Issa created permanent centers of Greek culture within traditionally Illyrian territories, leading to complex patterns of cultural adaptation and resistance as indigenous populations responded to Greek presence through selective adoption of Greek technologies, artistic styles, and social practices while maintaining core elements of traditional Illyrian cultural identity. Archaeological evidence from the hinterlands of Greek colonial sites reveals the development of hybrid material culture traditions that combine Greek and Illyrian elements in pottery production, metalwork, architecture, and burial practices. suggesting sustained peaceful interaction and cultural exchange alongside the military conflicts that dominate literary accounts of Greek-Illyrian relations. The evidence for Greek influence on Illyrian urban development includes the adoption of Greek architectural techniques and the construction of major Illyrian settlements, the integration of Greek urban planning concepts with indigenous defensive requirements, and the development of commercial and administrative areas that facilitated trade relationships and diplomatic contact between Greek and Illyrian political authorities. Greek literary sources provide detailed accounts of Illyrian military capabilities, political organization, and cultural practices that, despite obvious bias and misunderstanding, offer valuable insights into Illyrian society and the nature of Greek-Illyrian interaction, including descriptions of Illyrian warfare tactics, political leadership structures, and religious practices that complement and sometimes contradict the archaeological evidence. The economic relationships between Greek colonies and Illyrian communities involve complex exchange systems that brought Greek manufactured goods, wine, olive oil, and luxury items to Illyrian markets in return for local products including metals, livestock, agricultural surplus, forest products, and possibly slaves, creating economic interdependencies that encourage peaceful coexistence. Despite periodic military conflicts, archaeological evidence for Greek religious influence on Illyrian spiritual practices includes the adoption of Greek deities and cult practices at some Illyrian sites, the construction of Greek-style religious architecture, and evidence of religious syncretism that created hybrid spiritual systems combining Greek theological concepts with indigenous Illyrian religious traditions. The military conflicts between Greek colonies and Illyrian tribal confederations, documented in both archaeological and literary sources, reveal sophisticated Illyrian military tactics that prove highly effective against Greek conventional forces, while also demonstrating the ability of both sides to engage in diplomatic negotiations and alliance formation that produce periods of peaceful coexistence and cooperation. Greek influence on Illyrian political development may have included the adoption of some Greek institutional concepts, the development of more centralized political authority in response to Greek organizational models, and the integration of Greek diplomatic practices into Illyrian confederate systems, though the extent and nature of such influence remains subject to scholarly debate and archaeological investigation. The evidence for intermarriage and social integration between Greek and Illyrian populations includes burial contexts that suggest mixed cultural backgrounds, personal names that combine Greek and Illyrian elements, and material culture assemblages that reflect sustained intimate contact between members of both communities. Cultural resistance to Greek influence within Illyrian society is documented through the persistence of traditional material culture forms, the maintenance of indigenous political and religious institutions, and evidence of deliberate rejection of Greek practices in favor of continued adherence to traditional Illyrian cultural patterns. The impact of Greek intellectual and artistic traditions on Illyrian cultural development includes the possible influence of Greek historical and literary traditions on Illyrian oral culture, the adoption of Greek artistic motifs and techniques in Illyrian decorative arts, and the integration of Greek educational and intellectual practices among Illyrian elites who participated in broader Mediterranean cultural networks. The legacy of Greek-Illyrian interaction continued long after the Roman conquest of both Greek colonies and Illyrian territories, with hybrid cultural traditions persisting in provincial Roman culture and providing models for cultural adaptation and synthesis that would influence subsequent European development and demonstrate the complex dynamics of cultural contact and change in the ancient Mediterranean world. The expansion of Roman power into Illyrian territories during the 3rd through 1st centuries BCE marked a transformative period that would ultimately end Illyrian political independence, while creating new opportunities for cultural synthesis, economic development, and political advancement. that enabled Illyrian populations to maintain significant cultural autonomy within the Roman provincial system and contribute substantially to Roman military and administrative development. The initial phases of Roman-Illyrian contact, documented through archaeological evidence and literary sources including Polybius, Livy, and Appian, reveal complex patterns of diplomacy, alliance formation, and military conflict that reflected Roman strategic interests in controlling Adriatic commerce and preventing Illyrian interference with Italian coastal trade, while acknowledging Illyrian military capabilities and the practical difficulties of conquering the mountainous western Balkans. Archaeological evidence from this transitional period reveals gradual changes in material culture that suggest selective adoption of Roman technologies and practices, alongside continued adherence to traditional Illyrian cultural patterns, with settlement excavations showing hybrid architectural styles, mixed pottery assemblages that combine Roman and indigenous forms, and evidence of economic reorganization that adapted traditional Illyrian production systems to Roman market demands and administrative requirements. The Illyrian Wars of 229 to 219 and 219 to 168 BCE, culminating in the decisive defeat of King Genius and the dissolution of the independent Illyrian kingdom, represent critical moments in the transformation of southeastern European political organization and the integration of Balkan populations into the Roman Mediterranean system, while also demonstrating the sophisticated military and diplomatic capabilities that enabled Illyrian leaders to maintain independence for over 2 centuries after initial Roman contact. Roman literary sources describe Illyrian military organization, political structures, and cultural practices with greater detail and less obvious bias than earlier Greek accounts, providing valuable insights into late Illyrian society while also documenting Roman administrative policies and cultural attitudes toward conquered populations that would influence provincial organization throughout the empire. The archaeological evidence for Roman military occupation of former Illyrian territories includes the construction of permanent military installations, the development of road networks that connected previously isolated regions to Roman administrative and commercial systems, and the establishment of veteran colonies that introduced Roman agricultural and urban organization, while creating new opportunities for cultural exchange and economic development. The transformation of Illyrian political elites during the Roman conquest period reveals sophisticated adaptation strategies that enable some indigenous leaders to maintain positions of authority within Roman administrative systems while others chose resistance and exile, creating complex patterns of collaboration and opposition that influence the subsequent development of Roman provincial culture in the Balkans. Roman colonial and municipal foundations in former Illyrian territories, including Salona, Narona, and Daklea, created urban centers that combined Roman institutional structures with adapted indigenous cultural practices, providing models for urban development that would influence European city planning and demonstrating successful methods for integrating diverse populations into unified administrative systems. The evidence for cultural continuity and change during the Roman period includes the persistence of traditional Illyrian names, burial practices, and artistic traditions alongside the adoption of Roman legal systems, architectural styles, and religious practices, suggesting successful cultural synthesis that enabled indigenous populations to maintain important aspects of their cultural identity while participating fully in Roman imperial culture. Economic transformation under Roman rule involved the integration of traditional Illyrian production systems into Mediterranean-wide commercial networks, the development of new industries based on local resources and Roman market demands, and the creation of administrative and transportation infrastructure that connected previously isolated regions to broader imperial economic systems.